He was the flamboyant Reich Marshal and head of the Luftwaffe who fell sharply from power inside of the Third Reich, and also fell in the eyes of the Fuhrer at the end of the Second World War. In fact, Hermann Goring even risked execution and slaughter as his attempts to negotiate peace on behalf of the bunker-incapacitated Hitler were spun into a treasonous plot by the Brown Eminence, the personal secretary of the Fuhrer, Martin Bormann. Göring throughout his life was different to the rest of the Nazis. He was without doubt incredibly evil, murderous and a thief, but he could laugh at himself and poke fun at himself at times. He was someone who was married twice, and his second wife, Emmy Göring, became known as the First Lady of the Third Reich, and she took on a hosting role at many state banquets. But the Görings had a daughter named Edda, who died in 2018 at the age of 80. She had a very compelling life after the end of the Second World War. Her father died inside of Nuremberg prison by his own hand, but Edda Göring even attended many memorials for high-ranking Nazis and took part in rather questionable political gatherings after the war. But what happened to Göring's daughter after World War II? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Edda Karin Wilhelmina Göring was born inside of Berlin on the 2nd of June 1938. Her father was incredibly popular inside of Germany, and even received 600,000 messages of congratulation and goodwill from people all around the world and the Reich. Even telegrams from people who he would within a year be at war with were sent, congratulating him on the birth of his child, and there was a lifting sentiment inside of Nazi Germany when the news of Edda Göring's birth was announced. Some even claimed it was a story similar to the birth of Christ, and compared Edda to the messianic figure. One historian wrote regarding her birth that the Reich was jubilant on the 2nd of June. Its First Lady, Emmy Göring, gave birth to a baby girl. The child was named Edda. The actress was 45 and her husband had been shot in the groin during the beer hall putsch, so there was lots of talk of virgin birth. When Hermann came to pick up his wife and child from the sanatorium 10 days later, the streets were black with cheering crowds. It is generally accepted that at least the inspiration to name his daughter Edda had come from Hermann Göring's friendship with Benito Mussolini, with the Italian dictator's daughter also being named Edda. It's believed this may have been a nod to Mussolini and the growing political alliances between the Nazis and fascist Italians. Emmy Göring, Edda's mother, later denied this, but Edda wasn't the most common of names inside of the Reich at the time, meaning inspiration for it came from somewhere. Edda Göring was baptised at the huge hunting lodge of the Göring's Karinhal, and Hitler was named her godfather, and was present at the ceremony. The event was a huge Nazi spectacle, showing the wealth and influence of the Göring family, but Edda grew up in luxury and almost lived the life of a princess. She was deemed in one contemporary magazine as a sort of Nazi crown princess, but as the Second World War broke out, her father would have more of a role in the military and the conflict, but he still had a lot of time for his daughter. He had huge spectacles performed for her, and his Luftwaffe, the Air Force, even had a small-scale replica of Frederick the Great's palace built in the orchards of Karinhal for Edda to play in. This was very big and large, and was known as Edda's Little Palace. But there were some inside of Germany who dug their claws in, especially those within the inner circle towards Göring. The editor of Der Stürmer, the infamous Nazi newspaper, which was incredibly anti-Semitic, claimed in one edition that Edda Göring was conceived by artificial insemination, and when he heard of this, Hermann Göring rightfully flew off the handle. He was outraged, and went straight to Hitler with a number of other leading Nazis, and demanded that the dictator do something about it. Hitler agreed to have Streicher brought in front of a Nazi court, and he was stripped of some of his offices and honours, but Göring wanted Streicher executed for such a scandal. Streicher was allowed to continue publishing Der Stürmer, but he never after this went after Göring again. Edda, despite being very young, continued to live a life of luxury inside of many of the Göring residences, practically palaces, but as the end of the Second World War came around, her father would fall from grace, and he went on the run. He stayed inside of his mountain home in Obersalzburg, close to Hitler's Berghof, and with this his wife and daughter stayed with him. He was held under partial guard upon the orders of Hitler, but Göring was then handed over to the Americans, and Edda and Emmy were also held under lock and key, despite the fact Edda was roughly 7 years old. She was locked up inside of Camp Ashcan in Luxembourg, but in 1946 she was released and was living with her mother near to Nuremberg. One visitor described her as a beautiful child, the image of her father, bright and perky, polite and well-trained. But her father, Hermann Goring, was of course one of the most notorious war criminals of the Second World War, and he was brought to the Nuremberg trials and accused of all 4 charges, including war crimes and crimes against humanity. Göring was sentenced to death for his actions, and Edda was allowed to visit her father whilst he was in prison, and when she heard he was going to be killed, she said that she hoped to meet her daddy in heaven, which greatly touched her father. But Hermann Göring would cheat the hangman's noose, and the night before the execution, he died by his own hand, consuming a cyanide capsule that he somehow managed to have smuggled into the prison cell. In the years following her father's death and the Second World War, Edda lived with her mother and aunt, and they did move around a significant amount. As a former First Lady of the Reich, Emmy Göring encountered a number of significant problems, as she was a celebrity, but not a well-liked one. Much of her property, which had been stolen from people by her husband, was recalled to be returned to the rightful owner, but Emmy Göring tried to defend paintings and other items, saying that they were in fact the property of her daughter. Edda attended school and went to university, the University of Berlin, and she became a clerk in a law firm, and she then later became a doctor. It was claimed that she was slim, fair-haired and pretty, that she lives with her mother on the 5th floor of a modern apartment block in the Munich city centre. However, in her later years, she continued to work inside of different jobs in the medical field, and she regularly held company with former associates of Adolf Hitler. The grandson of one of Hitler's close friends, Winifred Wagner, later said that, "My aunt Friedlin was outraged when my grandmother, again, slowly blossomed as the first lady of the right-wing groups and received political friends such as Edda Göring, Ilse Hess, the former National Democratic Party of Germany chairman, Adolf von Faden, Gerda Troost, the wife of the Nazi architect and friend of Hitler, Paul Ludwig Troost, the British fascist leader Oswald Mosley, the Nazi film director Karl Ritter, and the racial author of former culturist leader of the Reich, Hans Severus Ziegler." So even in the years after the fall of the Reich, there were still Nazi meetings going on. Edda worked in a rehab clinic, and she spent much of her time looking after her mother Emmy, who died in June 1973. Years later she spent time with journalist Gerd Heidemann, who had purchased her father's yacht, and it was claimed that he charmed Edda, pretty, not married, and devoted to the memory of her father, the Reichsmarshal, and started an affair with her. Together they ran social events aboard the boat. Much of the talk was of Hitler and the Nazis, and the guests of honour were weathered eyewitnesses of the hallowed time, 2 generals, Karl Wolff and Wilhelm Mohnke, Mohnke being one of the people in the bunker in the final moments. So she continued to rub shoulders with former Nazis, but in her final years she lived a much more quieter life. She never really spoke out much about her father's role in the slaughter and murder of the Holocaust, or the crimes he committed as a major warmonger in the Second World War. She did claim in an interview that, "I loved him, as in Hermann Goring, very much, and it was obvious how much he loved me. My only memories of him are such loving ones. I cannot see him any other way. I actually expect that everyone has favourable opinion of my father, except maybe in America. He was a good father to me." She was denied a pension, which would have been given to her as a child of a former minister of the Old Reich, which deprived her of funds to live on, and she did later try to appeal the government officials in Bavaria to be compensated because of her father's reputation. But she had been given throughout her very early life huge amounts of paintings and riches, and some of these may have been hidden away and kept by Edda Göring, and some of these may still be missing today. She had throughout her life managed to have jewellery returned, given to her, valued at hundreds of thousands of Reichmarks, returned during legal proceedings. On the 21st of December 2018, at the age of 80, Edda Göring died inside of Munich. It's believed that she was buried in some form inside of the Waldfriedhof, a cemetery within the city, and it was here where her mother Emmy was buried. The exact location of Edda Göring's grave is not known, and she was buried in an unmarked grave, and the location has purposely not been disclosed. She may have even been interred with her mother quietly, but the ground disturbance would have been noted if this was the case. It's not even known if she was cremated, and that her ashes were then buried in an unmarked grave either, with much secrecy surrounding the final moments of Edda Göring. She was considered the Nazi crown princess, and lived the life of a princess as her mother and father's status right at the top of Nazi society solidified her importance. Edda Göring, after the Second World War, rubbed shoulders with many other Nazi leaders, and she was involved in meetings and appearances with former war criminals or army generals. Her birth led to a huge amount of celebration, and her father doted on her, and showed his fatherly side often in public. But let's remember that her father was a man who would be condemned for war crimes and crimes against humanity, and has been regarded as one of the worst art thieves in history. What I will say at the end of this video is that when you look at images of Edda Göring, especially in her final years, she certainly eerily has her father's looks. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.